Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. This one has been requested like freaking crazy and I don't know why. Maybe because it's William Jennings Bryan, one of the greatest what ifs out there, but that hey, what if this guy won the presidency? That would be a nice little thing. I don't know. So let's start off with the video. Of course, we're taking a look at 1896. In the 1896 election, of course, William Jennings Bryan would defeat William McKinley 238 to 209. Again, we do what we always do. We just go up to the tipping point of the state where McKinley wins. There you go. Or, excuse me, Bryan wins. So, William Jennings Bryan becomes the 25th President of the United States. In 1900, however, we have two very popular presidents. William Jennings Bryan, of course, the Democrat populist, and you have Theodore Roosevelt, essentially the Republican populist. It's a very close election. Of course, it's a very, very close election. It's like both individuals will be traveling throughout the country. Very popular, drawing big crowds. Maybe have a debate between the two. I don't know, like a radio debate. They did debate for Lincoln and Douglas, who were both very popular. So I would presume a debate would happen between Roosevelt and Bryan, which would be great. I would listen to that every day, all day. That would be amazing. These two were amazing speakers. So that would be very interesting. Of course, it would be a radio debate, so you wouldn't be able to see their face until like pictures came out. But Republican Governor Theodore Roosevelt would narrowly defeat Democrat President William Bryan 227 to 225 to become the 26th president. But he does lose the popular vote. Doesn't lose it by much, roughly 12,000 to 20,000 votes, somewhere in that range. Not much. It was a very close election. They would still be counting the ballots. Like, let's say it was 2020. At this point, they would still be counting the ballots. Not really. They wouldn't finish counting the ballots until probably a week. Actually, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, they probably would be still counting the ballots, and Bryan would still be president. There wouldn't be no the speaker wouldn't have to be president, or the vice president wouldn't have to be acting president, because back then the inauguration day was in March, so it would be around February before we'd have an official winner out of this race. But Roosevelt would be declared the victor, and I wouldn't a lot of people would be upset when it's found out that Bryan lost the popular vote, but Bryan would be like, look, this is this is how it works. He didn't win the popular vote by much. I didn't win the popular vote by much. So it's not that big of a deal. I could see William Jennings Bryan being like that kind of guy. There's no big change in 1904, however. Roosevelt still demolishes Alton B. Parker. You know, no relation to me, of course. If you get it, you get it. But Republican President Theodore Roosevelt defeats Democrat Judge Alton Parker 369 to 106 to win re-election. Then 1908, William Jennings Bryan, still very popular as ever. I think in this timeline, he's even more popular. Kind of like Jimmy Carter. After he left office, he became even more popular as time went on. Same thing would happen to William Jennings Bryan, in my opinion. Roosevelt would still handpick William Howard Taft, but people are just like so excited about Bryan potentially pulling a Grover Cleveland. It's even though it wasn't that long ago, it's still an exciting thing to hear. Running mates, Bryan chooses John Kerr. Taft would still choose James Sherman, so we still have that little dynamic going on there. But in the end of the day, Democrat President William Bryan defeats Republican Secretary William Taft 248 to 235 to win re-election as the 27th president. So he pulls a Grover Cleveland, but it's in a longer span. Grover had to wait 4 years. He just waited 8, but he still ended up winning big against William Taft. And plus, Taft wouldn't be as popular as in this because we just had an election 8 years ago between two very popular candidates who actually put America first, who actually gave a damn about the country. I mean, back then, everyone cared about the country, and to an extent, still today. But it's not as, hey, I'm going to go help out other countries before this one. It's kind of hard to explain, I know, but just bear with me. 1912. Bryan wouldn't run again, even though there would be calls for him to. He rejects the idea, so Champ Clark ends up winning the Democrat nomination. Robert La Follette would end up winning the Republican nomination. And Eugene Debs would actually pull off a very successful third-party campaign against the two. as right now populism is more of a mainstream idea within the country. Republican Senator Robert La Follette would defeat Democrat Speaker Champ Clark and Socialist State Senator Eugene Debs 330 to 188 to 13 to become the 28th U.S. President. So La Follette would end up becoming president. However, he wouldn't have a very great presidency. He would end up, you know, um, he would try to get us into World War I to no extent. He wouldn't have been able to talk Congress into doing it Wilson Wilson did. He would fail to, which would piss off a lot of people. The fact that also the unemployment rate would drop drastically due to this. But in 1916, Thomas Marshall would win the Democrat nomination, and Eugene Debs would also give it another shot. He's essentially the Ross Perot of this time. Running twice, does better the first time around. Thomas Marshall ends up winning the election. Democrat Governor Thomas Marshall defeats Republican President Robert La Follette and Socialist State Senator Eugene Debs 298 to 233 to become the 29th president. But Marshall doesn't get us into the war either, so that means America never enters World War I. But however, this does help out our employment. Marshall passes several laws that it would help out employment and all that. We would be in a small time of prosperity. It wouldn't last long, about a month, but people still feel good. They feel financially better within that time, and it's not a huge drop off either. It's like a small notch, but so nothing too important. Marshall ends up becoming a very popular president. So in 1920, whenever he faces off against Warren Harding, he doesn't do as well, but because Harding was, very popular amongst Republicans. Democrat President Thomas Marshall would defeat Republican Senator Warren Harding 269-262 to win re-election. Harding. So there you go. 1924, we would go on to it. The former Vice President, Hiram Johnson, who is always popular, even despite his unpopularity of his counterpart in Robert La Follette. Hiram Johnson ends up, Hiram Johnson wins the Republican primary with ease. John Davis, same thing. Democrats didn't know who to throw out there, so they just picked John Davis, and that costed him when Hiram Johnson defeats John Davis 405 to 126 to become the 30th president. Going on to 1928, Robert La Follette says, look, I never intended, essentially saying, look, I never intended for Hiram Johnson to become president. He's too out there. I don't agree with it. Originally, Robert La Follette actually attempted to primary Johnson, but hardly anyone would support the guy. So he changes parties to a Democrat and wins the Democrat primary because, hey, that's good. Democrats are thinking, hey, we can take Republican votes from Hiram Johnson. But Johnson is a very popular president. Establishing many national parks, which would put us in another era of prosperity, doing multiple things that actually that put our country in a good place financially. The 8-hour workday, of course, would have been established by William Jennings Bryan in either his first or second term, but Johnson would enforce it because it wouldn't be enforced properly until now. Not to the lack of trying, however, just no business owner wanted to do that. A set minimum wage would have actually been passed under Johnson's first term, so there you go. But Republican President Hiram Johnson defeats Democrat President Robert La Follette 431 to 100 to win re-election. So a very interesting scenario right here. The vice president to the president battling it off with one another, former running mates. We go into 1932. The Republican primary, Franklin Roosevelt. He would be a Republican in this timeline because of the success of both Bryan and Roosevelt. And since the Democrat Party is starting to become more and more left-leaning, you would think Roosevelt would still be all about that, but Republican Party is very moderate, very centrist, very populist again, so Roosevelt would be a Republican. He would actually switch parties a little bit before the 1928 election to Republican, which would spark some sort of rumors that he'd run for president, and he does. He chooses Charles Curtis, I think he's Native American. If I remember correctly, he had Native American blood, which helps him in the mid-America, where the Native American reserves are, so that helps him there. But Republican Governor Franklin Roosevelt defeats Democrat Governor Al Smith 400 to 131 to become the 31st president. Again, the Great Depression does hit near the end of Johnson's term, and Roosevelt does kind of flip it on its head and does pass the New Deal. He still passes that, which helps America greatly. The New Deal was great. Republican primary again. Henry Breckinridge becomes the Democrat nominee. Democrats are now starting to turn to neoliberalism, which they will set on for a path for a while. But Franklin Roosevelt, too popular, destroys this young kid. Republican President Franklin Roosevelt defeats Democrat Secretary Henry Breckinridge 504 to 27 to win re-election. Now Roosevelt, he teases to run for a third term, but Hiram Johnson talks him out of it, saying you don't need to run for a third term, you've done enough. And this actually prevents Franklin Roosevelt's name being tarnished by putting the Japanese in internment camps. This actually protects that, so he never does that. 1940, we have Thomas Dewey. The Republicans nominate a very popular attorney from New York, Thomas Dewey again, and Democrats nominate they just nominate someone who they thought, hey, this is the safe choice. Let's get a Democrat back in office. Henry Wallace, the secretary under, I believe, the Marshall administration. Sorry, I had to check my notes. Republican attorney Thomas Dewey still defeats Democrat Secretary Henry Wallace 355 to 176 to become the 32nd president. So, Wallace doesn't win here. 1944, Democrats finally nominate someone who's very popular with Americans. That is Cordell Hull. He's not a neoliberal, but he's very traditionalist, but still popular nonetheless. He does very well against Thomas Dewey, causing him to campaign more vigorously than he had to against Henry Wallace. But which could be the reason why Thomas Dewey won, as Republican President Thomas Dewey defeats Democrat Congressman Cordell Hull 310 to 221 to win re-election. But Dewey does end up losing the popular vote here, and again people are looking at it as like, why do we still have the Electoral College if this is happening again? Cordell Hull doesn't really say anything. He refuses to mention whether he thinks the Electoral College should be removed or not. People who know him will say he supports getting rid of it, and people who also know him will say he supports keeping it. So you're hearing two different sides of the story throughout history. 1948 happens, and Democrats nominate, again, a very southern popular governor, Strom Thurmond. And Democrats nominate a very popular governor from Minnesota, Harold Stassen. Strom Thurmond, very popular, destroys Harold Stassen. It's not even it's no competition. Harold Stassen was very boring. Didn't really have that much of charisma. Strom Thurmond, as we know, did. Had a great legacy behind him, as Democrat Governor Strom Thurmond defeats Republican Governor Harold Stassen 286-245 to become the 33rd president. We go on to 1952, and Strom Thurmond is going up against Richard Nixon. He does even better this time, electorally-wise, than he did last time. He even does better popular vote-wise, as more numbers in the South, and as he even decides to try out the Rust Belt a little bit, spends more time on the South and Rust Belt more than anything else, which costed him a bunch of mid-American states and the West, and some northeastern states that he had, well, not really the Northeast, but you know what I mean. But Democrat President Strom Thurmond defeats Republican Senator Richard Nixon 293 to 238 to win re-election. Going on to 1956, there's a lot of talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower running for president. People are trying to figure out, is he a Democrat, is he a Republican? People are trying to figure that out. He announces that he's a Democrat. Yes, he announced he's a Democrat. Going on that idea of they went from populism to neoliberalism to now moderatism, as Dwight D. Eisenhower, very moderate, goes on to challenge John Bricker, who, again, the Republicans are starting to, become more liberal instead of moderate. They're like this moderate left party, while the Democrat are just the center moderate party. Democrat General Dwight Eisenhower would defeat Republican Senator John Bricker 286-244 to become the 34th president. Eisenhower has a pretty uneventful term, but he chooses not to run again simply because his doctor thinks, his health is getting to the worst of him. there was a chance he didn't even run in this election because of his health, but he doesn't run for a second term. First president since Rutherford Hayes to do so. And instead, we go on to 1960. We had Nelson Rockefeller and John F. Kennedy. Kennedy, of course, running on the whole, um, you know. But, it's a very close election. Not as close as Nixon Kennedy. But Republican Governor Nelson Rockefeller defeats Democrat Senator John Kennedy 301-235 to become the 35th president. But he does lose the popular vote. And Kennedy, he's not upset. He understands tradition and all that. And I don't think he would call to remove the Electoral College. I'm sure supporters of Kennedy would, as Republicans are winning elections without winning the popular vote, which people are saying is damaging the democracy, even in 1960. In 1964, Nelson Rockefeller doesn't have that great of a presidency. They go into a recession, which is never good, and so George Wallace ends up winning the Democrat nomination, and again, he is running on, segregation. However, the South is becoming more and more Republican as more African Americans start coming in and doing all that. John Kennedy would still be in the Senate. He'd still be trying to pass the Civil Rights Act to no avail. However, Nelson Rockefeller does end up supporting this idea, which gets out more African Americans to vote. However, some of them can't vote, are instead, having to, sneak a vote in, which is, counted across the country. Historians would say Wallace probably would have won the entire South if this didn't happen. It would. But Democrat Governor George Wallace defeats Republican President Nelson Rockefeller 409-129 to become the 36th president. Wallace ends up becoming a pretty bad president, trying to pass multiple segregational laws multiple laws that prevents African Americans from doing, anything, having any freedoms. And Republicans go to the governor of Michigan, George Romney, who actually co-sponsored the Civil Rights Bill with Kennedy when he was introduced in the Senate. Romney would be, trying to convince the entire country that, hey, we need to stand together, we are united, all that stuff. And that says Republican president, but it's a Republican Governor George Romney defeats Democrat President George Wallace 274-264 to become the 37th U.S. president. And Romney does become president. And he has a pretty, he's very popular, nothing too special, but in 1972, he runs against Terry Sanford, the governor of North Carolina, but he ends up beating Terry Sanford 301-236 to win re-election. Sanford wouldn't have done enough to pull out enough of the vote to beat Romney. Romney, very popular, really never made anyone mad. And we go on to 1976. Republicans nominate the Vice President, Ronald Reagan. And Democrats would still nominate Jimmy Carter. This would be a path for Republicans to move to the right of the country, but Democrats are also moving, they've been to the right with the past two nominees, Wallace and Sanford, so they're sitting in the right side of the column as of right now. But this election would be a bit closer than it was in real life, but Republican Vice President Ronald Reagan defeats Democrat Governor Jimmy Carter 341-196 to become the 38th president. Reagan essentially has his 8 years, 4 years earlier. Essentially what happens in his term is starting now. So there's really no change. The Soviet Union will fall early. Also forgot to mention that America never enters World War II and goes into the war with the Nazis for a long time, up until, let's say, the 60s, late 60s, late 70s. And then as soon as that ends, America immediately goes into the Cold War with the Soviet Union, which makes people even more afraid. 1980, Ronald Reagan is going up against Jerry Brown, both of them governors of good old California, but Reagan ends up, still very popular. He ends up defeating Jerry Brown 520-18 to win re-election. And we go on to 1988. Michael Dukakis would not win the nomination, as the Democrats are afraid of him going too far to the left, but they do go left, back relatively near the center with Ruben Askew. And again, Ruben Askew does better than most people would expect. Again, Bush, very popular vice president, He defeats SQ 415 to 123 to become the 39th president. But again, a recession occurs during Bush's term, which causes him to lose, this time to Bruce Babbitt, a very, they're now to the left. We are now to the, this is where we have Republicans are conservative, Democrats are liberal, essentially. Bruce Babbitt defeats George Bush 294 to 243 to become the 40th president. Going to 1992, excuse me, Pat Buchanan gives it a shot, very close election. Popular vote-wise, electorally, you can make your mind up there, but Bruce Babbitt defeats Pat Buchanan 325-213. Bruce Babbitt has a pretty great presidency, pretty great 8 years. People love the guy. We go into 1986. Pat Buchanan decides to go at it again, this time going up against Vice President Al Gore. Al Gore, people say he's too far to the left, which turns off a lot of voters, which gives Pat Buchanan enough support to defeat Al Gore 318 to 220 to become the 41st president of the United States. We go on to the 2000 election. This time, Pat Buchanan going up against Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley wouldn't have been able to, in my opinion, wouldn't have garnered up enough support, and Pat Buchanan would have been very popular. Some things he would have done: he would have finished the fence. Well, we now call the wall, but it was called the fence back then. He would have finished that, which he would have passed immigration laws, which would be a lot more moderate this time along. So, like, the naturalization process would be a lot easier, a lot less of a wait time. He would have gone and killed Osama bin Laden, so 9/11 wouldn't have happened. But that does also mean that we would have gone into the war in the Middle East much sooner. War on Terror would have started so much sooner. So that's Pat Buchanan's presidency in a nutshell. The 2004 election, John Kerry ends up beating Bush. The only change here is Florida would flip, although narrowly, nothing too major here. Kerry's the 42nd president. But of course, the housing bubble does burst, causing a bad recession on top of the traditional post-war recession as well. So Kerry's in a very bad place as he ends up losing to a libertarian-esque Republican in Ron Paul. Ron Paul still runs on his libertarian agenda as he beats John Kerry. I think this would be his second attempt at the presidency, Ron Paul, and he becomes the 43rd president. And in 2012, Ron Paul would end up going up against a longtime senator in Joe Biden. Joe Biden, you know, very calm guy, very nice kind of gentleman, but Biden's also not really proposing all that too much. He did better in the Senate. Most people would agree on that. And Ron Paul would defeat Joe Biden 289 to 249. Very close election, popular vote-wise on this one as well, as, you know, people like both guys, so a lot of people would turn out. There's no record-breaking turnout or anything, but... Then we go on to the 2016 election. We have Democrats would nominate Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, because, you know, he would be handpicked over Bernie Sanders any day. So we have the whole the DNC screwing Bernie, but this time Martin O'Malley. And it's not really O'Malley's fault. I would presume he would know nothing about it, and he would probably go out and say that he was sorry that it ever happened. And Republicans would nominate Ted Cruz. Donald Trump wouldn't run. He would be a Democrat this time, and I don't think he would have any presidential aspirations at this day and age, with no terrible immigration policies and all that, and foreign policies and all that, so Trump probably wouldn't end up running. Neither Jeb Bush, since George Bush lost and George Sr. lost after one term. I don't think there'd really be a need for Jeb Bush to run. I don't think he'd want to run after all that. But Democrat Governor Martin O'Malley defeated Republican Senator Ted Cruz 282 to 256 to become the 44th president. And of course, we all know what happens in between the 2016-2020 elections. The COVID-19 pandemic would hit, and Martin O'Malley, in my opinion, probably would do either as well or a little bit worse than what Trump handled it. And I think, and I don't care who you are, if you're got elected in 2016 or running in 2020 again as president, you're probably going to lose. And at this time, Democrats go after Republicans, they nominate the son of President Ron Paul, Senator Rand Paul, and he chooses former Nevada governor and very popular Nevada governor Bryan Sandoval. Rand Paul would end up defeating Martin O'Malley 297 to 241 to become the 45th president. And that's where we stand now. So guys, I hope you enjoy this video. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.